Did you know that winemakers in California and South Africa often blend Grenache Blanc, Marsanne and Roussanne and boldly call it a Rhone-style white blend? But at first glance, Marsanne, Roussanne and Grenache Blanc don't appear to be blended in any of the major Rhone appellations. And sure, one can blend Marsanne and Roussanne in the northern Rhone, or Roussanne and Grenache Blanc in famed appellations like Châteauneuf-du-Pape or Gigondas in the southern Rhone. But one has to really dig deep before you find an AOC in the Rhone Valley that can blend all three of those cultivars. Now, one appellation where you will find these three cultivars blended is the Vaqueras AOC. But you don't need to feel too bad for missing that one, because 97% of the wines coming out of Vaqueras are red. And Vaqueras happens to be one of the smallest appellations in the Rhone with regards to its production size. So essentially, you'll only ever find those three cultivars blended in 3% of one of the smallest production appellations in the Rhone Valley. Hardly a poster child expression of the Rhone. And yet there is one more appellation, if we are to be fair. You will also find these three cultivars blended in Lirac AOC. But again, white wines are the minority, and Marsanne is kind of viewed, within Lirac at least, to be a sort of also-ran auxiliary cultivar. It's really not an obvious choice. If one looks just a little further south of the Rhone, to the Languedoc-Roussillon region, there you will find Grenache Blanc, Marsanne and Roussanne blended willy-nilly. There are plenty of white blends there to inspire centuries of New World white blends. But unfortunately, Languedoc is just a little light in the street cred department. So announcing your wines as being made in the Languedoc blending style doesn't really say too much about your wine. Probably worse, it's kind of akin to an Italian tailor proudly announcing his commitment to only using silks from Botswana. Bit of a weird flex. So while blending Grenache Blanc, Marsanne and Roussanne and then calling it a Rhone style blend is most certainly a little bit of a stretch, you're probably going to sell more wine if you choose to do so. The reason that we're interrogating Rhone style white blends in the first place is because today's hand drink solo wine of the day is exactly such a white blend called The Search, made by the legendary winemaker Trizanne. And this wine is sold in both the United Kingdom and in South Africa. Trizanne is a supremely exciting winemaker, probably best known for her super South Coast Sauvignons and Syrahs, made with fruit from some of the most southerly vineyard sites on the entire continent of Africa. She produces a highly lauded Sauvignon Blanc from the Sondagskloof ward, which by the way was also the highest scoring Sauvignon Blanc in Tim Atkin's 2023 South African Wine Report. She also makes a fascinating skin contact Semillon from Elam, as well as producing a captivating Chardonnay made from the lower Davon-Hocks ward, which sounds like a made-up place, but it's actually very real, and it's part of a top-secret undercover Chardonnay explosion due to the rather incredible limey chalk soils that they have down there. But Trizanne's The Search white blend is made nowhere near the Cape South coast. Instead, it is made with fruit sourced from the mighty Voor-Paardeberg. For those of you who have never heard of the Voor-Paardeberg, well, it is probably the most famous Swartland ward that never was. In fact, it lies just outside the Swartland, more technically in the Paarl district, separated from the Swartland by the rather famous granitic extrusion called the Paardeberg. As I mentioned elsewhere, in the early 2000s, it was the Voor-Paardeberg that served as a sort of incubator for the now world-famous winemakers of Adi Badenhorst and Eben Sadi. But in the present day, Voor-Paardeberg is probably best known for its Languedoc-style white blends, which include cultivars like Marsanne, Grenache Blanc, Roussanne, but most often are fronted by some rather spectacular Chenin Blanc, planted sometimes on granitic soils, anecdotally, to deliver incredible freshness and acidity, or on shale soils, anecdotally, to deliver more fatness and fullness on the mid-palate. But you should also know that Vondeling winemaker Matt Copeland, who is kind of like the head boy of the Voor-Paardeberg, recently won the trophy at the Platter 2024 award ceremony for the best Bordeaux in the entire Cape Winelands. It was his Philosophy Bordeaux blend under the Vondeling label that won the award. He's also won a whole bunch of awards for his barrel matured Merlot. So it's worth noting that the Voor-Paardeberg definitely has more to offer than just obscure white blends. Now, when we get into the glass and give this guy a sniff, Well, we do get a gloriously generous, fresh nose of orange barley candy, nectarine fruit, some bright citrus, perhaps mandarin. And then there's some beeswax in there as well, which adds a lovely sort of element of spice to it. And I would say that most of this probably is tertiary or time related, in the sense that this wine is already 4 years old. Interestingly, even though this wine was fermented in a combination of stainless steel tank and foudre, one doesn't get the sense that there's any real presence of oak on the aromas. Now, when we take a sip, well, we might be surprised at first at just how light the mouthfeel is, especially because grapes like Grenache Blanc and Roussanne can both deliver some really rich, rather rounded wines. But when we look at the alcohol figure on the side label, we see that at 12.5% alcohol, there possibly were some early harvest shenanigans going on in there. When I spoke to winemaker Trizanne, she said she definitely harvested the Grenache fairly early, 21.5 volume. And then the Marsanne, while it's always going to provide some sort of tannic structure, it's a bit of a workhorse cultivar, she was able to harvest that early. But when it came to Roussanne, because it was a much smaller component, only 10%, she was ready to let that be the flower child that it was always going to be. So she didn't bother picking that early, but rather let it ripen and let it deliver those slightly richer floral notes. But in the blend, what one gets is a fresh, lighter styled wine with a touch of the floral on the aromas. So this bit of information about those early harvest components help us make sense of why we get loads of the bright, juicy citrus elements, but perhaps a little bit less of the riper, rounder stone fruit elements that can come from a ripe Grenache Blanc or even from Roussanne. But remember, it's only 10% in this particular wine. Probably my favorite part of the wine comes towards the finish, where you have a kind of slow rise, savory umami-ness that comes to the fore. And you'll get this if you let the wine sit in your mouth for a little while. So towards the end there, you get the savory coming through the fruit, but then you also get those beeswax notes that we mentioned on the aroma, and a kind of burst of texture, which almost feels like you're chewing on a bit of Meyer lemon pith. That's all we have time for today, but if you have any questions about Trizanne or the exciting undercover Chardonnays from the lower Davenhorst-Rivier, then leave a question on the website and I will do my best to get back to you with a meaningful answer. And if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon to help us make more of these videos, and subscribe to the Hendrik Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month that talk about things like wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars like Trizanne coming out of the South African winelands.